Before you think, before you analyze, and before you try to explain anything to yourself, something already pulls you in. You haven't chosen yet, but part of you already knows which archetype you're drawn to, and that matters more than you realize.
Most lives aren't shaped by the decisions we carefully plan. They're shaped by the instincts we rarely question. The quiet pull, the immediate resonance. The feeling of this one feels familiar, even when you don't know why.
This is where the test truly begins. Right now, you are not choosing a character. You are responding to a symbol. And symbols don't speak to the logical mind first. Symbols speak directly to the unconscious, the part of you that remembers emotional patterns, unspoken needs, and unfinished inner stories. That's why this choice isn't about taste, fantasy, or preference. It's about recognition. As you look at the 5 archetypes before you, notice which one catches your attention first. Not the one you think you should choose. Not the one that seems strongest, kindest, or most admirable. The one that quietly pulls at you, even if you don't fully trust that pull yet.
That reaction happens faster than logic because it comes from deeper than logic.
Each archetype represents a different way of moving through life, a different emotional strategy, a different relationship with control, vulnerability, freedom, and inner peace. And whichever one calls to you now reflects something active inside you, something that wants acknowledgement.
This doesn't mean you are that archetype. It means part of you needs what it represents.
What matters is how you choose in this moment. So take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. Imagine there's no audience, no judgment, no right answer, just you and your instinct. If you feel torn between two, notice which one your eyes return to. If one makes you feel calm, curious, uneasy, or strangely comforted, don't dismiss it. That emotion is part of the message. And remember, this is not a label. It's a snapshot of where your inner world is right now. People grow. Needs change. Awareness shifts. The symbol that resonates today may not be the same one that speaks to you a year from now. That isn't inconsistency. That's individuation. And before we continue, if this kind of introspective content speaks to you, the kind that helps you understand yourself beyond surface level advice, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps this space grow and allows us to keep creating these quiet moments of reflection together. Now hold your choice gently in mind, because in the next chapter we begin uncovering what that instinctive pull says about you. Starting with the archetype who represents strength, built in solitude. If you are drawn to the figure who stands calmly on their own, composed, self-contained, and steady, your inner world may be shaped by a deep relationship with independence. This is not the loud kind of strength. It's the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that doesn't wait to be rescued. The kind that rarely reveals how much it carries. People who resonate with this archetype often learned early that relying on themselves felt safer than relying on others. Sometimes that came from necessity, moments when support wasn't consistent, when expectations weren't met, or when vulnerability didn't feel protected. Other times, it emerged from choice, a deliberate decision to build inner structure, discipline, and emotional self-sufficiency. But either way, over time, independence became more than a skill. It became an identity. You likely value autonomy. You feel Most at peace when you control your own rhythm, your own space, your own decisions. You don't need constant reassurance, and you're capable of standing firm, even when life feels uncertain.
From the outside, this can look like confidence, maturity, and emotional stability. And in many ways, it is. But strength built in solitude has a quieter side, one that rarely gets acknowledged. When you're used to carrying things alone, asking for help can feel unnatural. Opening up emotionally may feel inefficient, risky, or unnecessary. You might tell yourself you're just private, that you don't want to burden anyone, that you simply prefer handling things internally. They heal. Sometimes that's true, but other times, independence becomes a shield against disappointment, a shield against being misunderstood, a shield against the vulnerability that comes with needing someone else. This doesn't mean you're emotionally closed, it means you're selective. You don't open easily. But when you do, it's real. It's deep. It's intentional. And the question this archetype gently asks isn't, why are you so independent? It's something softer and more honest.
Is your independence still protecting you? Or is it quietly isolating you?
There's no accusation here, it's curiosity. Because true strength is not weakened by connection. And self-reliance doesn't disappear when you allow yourself to be seen. Sometimes the next phase of growth isn't about becoming stronger. It's about becoming so secure in your strength that you no longer need to stand alone all the time.
You heard a fair guy.
Hold that thought with compassion, because in the next chapter we'll explore a very different inner world, one guided not by structure and distance, but by deep emotional sensitivity and intuition. But before we go there, something important needs to be said about what comes next. Because the second archetype reveals a truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. If your attention was drawn to the figure whose presence feels gentle, soft, and emotionally open, your inner world may be guided less by control and more by feeling. This is the kind of sensitivity that doesn't just notice emotions, it inhabits them. You likely perceive the world through subtle cues, tone of voice, pauses in conversation, shifts in energy that other people miss entirely. You can sense when something is off before anyone says a word. And this doesn't come from overthinking. It comes from emotional attunement. For you, emotions are not interruptions. They are information. People who resonate with this archetype have often learned early to read emotional environments carefully. Sometimes this sensitivity grew in spaces where awareness was necessary, where understanding others created safety, connection, or harmony. Over time, this ability became part of who you are. You feel deeply. You care sincerely. You're moved by beauty, stories, memories, moments that others pass over quickly. And because of that, you bring warmth into the lives around you, often without realizing how much. But depth always has a weight. When you feel everything, it's easy to carry more than what belongs to you. You may absorb other people's moods, pain, or unspoken expectations. You might find yourself offering emotional support instinctively even when you're tired, even when no one asked you to. Not because you feel obligated, because it feels natural.
And over time, that can quietly lead to emotional exhaustion, to moments where you feel drained without knowing why, to confusion about where your feelings end and someone else's begin. Sensitivity, when unsupported, can turn inward. You may question yourself, wonder if you're too much, too emotional, too affected, too open. And so sometimes you might hide this part of yourself, softening your reactions, minimizing your feelings, telling yourself to be stronger. But this archetype isn't asking you to become less sensitive. She's asking you to become protective of your sensitivity, because empathy without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and compassion without self-compassion slowly empties you. Your emotional depth is not a weakness to correct, it's a strength to steward. And the moment you begin treating your feelings with the same care you offer other people, something shifts. Sensitivity stops being overwhelming and becomes grounding. The question this archetype offers is gentle but important. Who takes care of the one who feels everything? If you're finding value in this exploration, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. This kind of content takes time to create, and your support ensures we can keep diving into the depths of the psyche together. Sit with that for a moment, because in the next chapter, we move into a very different inner landscape, one shaped by control, ambition, and the need to remain composed and powerful, even when softness waits beneath the surface. And here's where things get uncomfortable for most people. If you felt drawn to the figure who stands tall, composed, unmistakably commanding, your inner world may be organized around power, structure, and self-mastery. This isn't about dominance over others. It's about authority over yourself. You likely value clarity, direction, and effectiveness. You move through life with intention, preferring to stay one step ahead rather than reacting emotionally to what unfolds. There's comfort in knowing where you stand, what you want, and how to get there. Uncertainty feels less like mystery and more like risk. For you, control isn't obsession, it's protection.
Gaintes from all to reach common. As in your anti-internet, the hearts needs to. You'll be me a god to the first darkness that you touch. The beat behind. Calculated decisive reduces chaos. If you remember received past is like price trade and my S5 or man. Exist to fail they is stated I got what's it. How do you accomplish this? I think quite explain. Yeah, of course, it should be sounds or anything. As these options you the video. Was it paying?
Power became a way to regain footing, a way to stay grounded when the ground itself felt unreliable. And over time, control transformed into armor. You don't easily reveal doubt. You rarely let others see hesitation. Even when emotions rise, you tend to manage them privately, efficiently, almost strategically. Vulnerability may feel unnecessary, or worse, destabilized. And yet, beneath that composure, there is often a deep emotional intensity, because the desire to remain strong can quietly suppress softer needs. Rest, reassurance, tenderness, or simply the relief of not having to hold everything together. You may feel responsible not just for your own stability, but for the emotional environment around you. And letting go can feel like letting people down. Because when control becomes constant, it can become exhausting even if no one sees it. You may find it hard to relax fully, hard to trust situations you can't influence, hard to let someone support you without feeling exposed. This archetype is not here to criticize your strength. It's here to ask one subtle question. What would happen if you didn't have to be strong all the time? True power isn't threatened by honesty. Authority doesn't disappear when softness enters the room. In fact, the most grounded forms of leadership, internal or external, come from the ability to hold both firmness and vulnerability without fear. Control once kept you safe. Now it may be time to let it breathe, because in the next chapter, we'll meet an archetype guided by a completely different force, one who resists containment, follows curiosity, and seeks meaning through movement, change, and freedom. If your eyes were drawn to the figure who seems light, dynamic, and always facing the horizon, your inner world may be shaped by a deep relationship with freedom. Not freedom as rebellion, freedom as oxygen. You likely feel most alive when you're exploring, learning, changing, or expressing yourself without restraint. Routine can feel suffocating. Expectations can feel heavy, and you can sense almost immediately when something begins to limit who you are becoming.
For you, movement isn't restlessness. It's self-preservation.
People who resonate with this archetype often fear stagnation more than failure. Being confined emotionally, socially, mentally can feel like losing access to yourself. So you seek new experiences, new ideas, new paths, not because you're dissatisfied, because growth for you requires space. You move your authenticity deeply. You resist roles that feel imposed, identities that feel too narrow, relationships that demand you shrink, and when you commit, it must be on your terms, aligned with who you are, not who you're expected to be. But freedom has a quieter tension beneath it. Because constant movement can sometimes be a way of staying just ahead of discomfort when things become emotionally dense, unclear, demanding. The instinct may be to step back, change direction, create distance. Not because you don't care, because staying still with emotional weight can feel threatening. Over time, this can create a pattern. You start strongly, you feel inspired, and then you pull away once depth requires grounding. This doesn't mean you're incapable of commitment. It means you may associate commitment with loss of self, and that association matters. The invitation of this archetype is not to give up your freedom. It's to redefine it. True freedom is not the absence of roots. It's the ability to choose where you stand without feeling trapped. There is a version of freedom that runs from discomfort, and another that moves through it. One avoids depth, the other expands because of it. Learning to recognize the difference is part of your inner work. So ask yourself gently,
am I moving toward growth or away from what asks me to stay?
Hold that question softly, because in the final chapter,
after something did.
Dustin Finwelly.
If you are drawn to the figure whose presence feels calm, grounded, and quietly complete, your inner world may be seeking or already cultivating balance.
This is not the absence of struggle, it is the integration of it.
Balance doesn't come from avoiding extremes. It comes from understanding them. People who resonate with this archetype often carry a history of inner contrasts, strength and tenderness, ambition and restlessness, independence and a longing for connection. And at some point, these forces stopped competing and began listening to one another. You may have learned through experience rather than theory that pushing too hard creates burnout and giving too much creates emptiness. That control without softness becomes rigid, and freedom without grounding becomes unstable. So balance emerged not as an ideal you chased, but as something you needed in order to stay whole. Emotional maturity isn't about having everything figured out. It's about being honest with what you feel without being ruled by it. You likely know when to step forward and when to pause, when to speak, and when silence carries more truth. This doesn't mean you're always calm. It means you trust yourself enough to move through discomfort without panicking. But balance is often misunderstood.
Other people may see your composure and assume you've arrived, that nothing shakes you anymore.
In reality, balance requires constant presence. It's something you practice, not something you possess. And sometimes maintaining it means disappointing others, setting boundaries, choosing rest over productivity, choosing clarity over being liked. The shadow of balance is subtle. The temptation to stay neutral when something inside you wants to move, to avoid conflict not out of fear, but out of habit. Harmony can become hiding if it silences truth. This archetype doesn't ask you to give up your peace. It asks you to protect it honestly, because balance is not emotional numbness. Balance is emotional integration. And perhaps the most important truth of this entire journey is this. Because every archetype you've encountered lives within you. Independence, sensitivity, power, freedom, balance, none of them cancel each other out. They rise and quiet down depending on what your inner world needs in different seasons of life. The one you chose today simply revealed what is most alive in you right now. As you move forward, remember growth isn't about becoming someone else. It's about allowing each part of you to exist without fear and learning when to let each one lead. If this reflection stayed with you, carry it gently. Return to it when something inside you begins to shift again. Because self-understanding is not a destination. It's a conversation you keep having with yourself. And if you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was created for. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next exploration of the psyche.